Should you stay in a toxic relationship? No, of course not. You shouldn't stay in a toxic relationship. But the question is, does the relationship have to remain toxic? If the relationship is chronically toxic, if it's a bad relationship, you can't stay in it. But often, relationships can be improved. Often, relationships can be made better. One of the things that we tend to simplify is the idea of self-improvement. On the one hand, we say, okay, I'm going to be better, and then we don't do anything about it. Or on the other hand, we say, we're never, ever going to change. And this is what happens in our marriages, in our intimate relationships. So we have a very simplistic idea of what happens over the course of our marriage. And we don't include in that paradigm the notion of growth and change. So if a person's in a toxic relationship, and the toxic relationship is going to remain toxic, it's not a good idea to stay in that relationship. Obviously, you have to deal with the realities of children and parnasa, but you should not stay in a toxic relationship. But very, very often, relationships that are toxic can be detoxed, untoxified, okay? And I'm going to say 2 points on this, and I've talked about this in many other of these Q&As. The first is, when every couple gets married, he and she, each in their own way, test the limits of their spouse. What can I get away with and it'll still be a good guy? Can I sleep in and she won't be upset? Can I not take out the garbage and won't be upset? Can I not wash the dishes and won't be upset? And I'm a guy, so I'm giving you guy versions of it, but girls do the same thing. And over the course of the first period of our marriage, say months or a year, we accept chesrenis in our spouse, deficiencies in our spouse, and we even accept a certain amount of abuse in our spouse. And that becomes the norm in the marriage. It becomes the baseline. Now, over time, the excitement of the beginning of the marriage diminishes, and all you're left with is a lazy husband or an insulting wife or whatever the particular forms are, or you're being made to go to a meal that you don't want to be at, to sit in a house that you're not comfortable in because you did it the first year. And you feel stuck, and you do it, and you do it, and you do it, and you do it, and you become very resentful. What you don't realize is that in the very, very beginning of the marriage, you gave permission for all of these inappropriate behaviors or undesirable phenomena to be introduced to you because you accepted them initially. And then over time, it's just the nature of your relationship, and you don't know what to do about it. And those things could be reversed. You don't have to remain in those stuck conditions. Those things can be reversed. Those things can be reversed. And if you understand that, and you can identify which particular practices, which particular compromises are particularly disturbing to you, whether they're compromises in your spouse or compromises that you've been allowed to make in yourself, you have to relearn the terms of your marriage that are acceptable to both of you. But here's the hard part. The hard part is, in the very beginning of your marriage, you can tell your spouse, I don't like this. I don't like that. Once the patterns are established, it's much, much more difficult to say to your spouse, I don't like this. And the ability to heal, to remedy what's called, in this question, a toxic situation, is to heal yourself. And this is something which is counterintuitive but incredibly true. If you want to help, if you feel like your marriage is sluggish, you feel like your marriage is a series of mutually acceptable insults. I insult her and she insults me. I ignore her, she ignores me. I do things that she doesn't like, she does things that I don't like, and we've sort of accepted that as the terms of our marriage. It's never good to leave something you don't like alone and just say, okay, these are the terms. You can accept things, but if you don't want to accept things, you need to figure out a way of remedying them. But later on in the marriage, you can't remedy your spouse, you can only remedy yourself. You can only fix the things that she doesn't like about you. And she has to fix the things that you don't like about her. And this is difficult. But this is what couples do if they want to have meaningful marriages and non-toxic relationships, is when you realize that the things about the marriage that you don't like, you focus on the things you can correct. Now, you have a lot of complaints. You have a lot of things you don't like about your spouse. You've probably told it to her 100 times, and she pushes back with, "You're not fair," or you're 100 times worse than me in this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. But if you instead actually work on improving, correcting little things in the marriage that are very important to her, that you have fallen into a bad pattern with because initially she allowed you, and you work on yourself, over time, she'll reciprocate. She'll reciprocate, and she'll want to please you. And there are couples who've had very difficult beginnings to their marriage, and they got help. If they can't do it by themselves, and it's very, very hard to do what I'm describing by yourself, you get a third party involved, and you do what you need to do, and you fix yourself, and your spouse fixes herself, and in the end, you fix the relationship, and you come closer together. I feel about marriage. I think marriage is the hardest thing we do in our life. I think it's harder to be married for 60 years, for 80 years, than to have to raise kids. And raising kids is very hard. Because in a marriage, every midah you have comes out. Everything about yourself that you don't like, your wife knows. Everything about yourself that you're ashamed of, your husband knows. And it's like living in front of a mirror full of cracks, and every deficiency is right for everybody to see. When you're single, you can hide those things. In a marriage, they come out, and it doesn't feel good. But on the other hand, there is no greater circumstance of bidur hamidus where a person can actually work on themselves and slowly remedy the things about themselves that they don't like than being this close to another human being. That's the bidur aspect. That's the correction of midas aspect that we gain from being close to another human being in the framework of a marriage. We're forced by the situation to become better people. But it's very critical to remember that we cannot fix the other person, we have to fix only ourselves. And in conclusion, I'm going to say the obvious, which is, you need a partner. If one person wants to work on the marriage and the other person doesn't work on the marriage, it could work, but you have to be a big tzaddik, and you have to be prepared to make a lot of sacrifices. It really has to be both partners working on the marriage. And working on the marriage doesn't mean working on changing my spouse. Working on the marriage is working on changing myself.